Welcome to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast, brought to you by the Wealthy Speaker School. This is the podcast dedicated to people who want to speak more as a way to build their income and grow their business. Hey, Wealthy Speaker listeners, welcome to the show. It's Jane Atkinson here. I wanted to record a little preamble for this particular podcast because it started out in one direction and it ended up somewhere else. I cannot wait for you to hear my interview with Erin Falconer. She is just, such an amazing business person. And I started out thinking that we were going to be talking about building a worldwide online community, which we do talk about, but really the show is so much more than that I wanted to retitle it to Fearlessly Building Your Business. It's just an absolutely fantastic show, and I hope that you will take a listen. Well, welcome everyone to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast. I'm your host, Jane Atkinson. Today's topic is building a worldwide online community, and we have back to the show. So excited to have you here, Erin Falconer. Welcome, Erin.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be back.
Well, you and I remember our last show, so we're going to reference that in the show notes. We had so much fun and there were so many different things that we could be talking about. But really, you have this amazing community called pickthebrain.com, and there's a lot of features to that. Tell us a little bit about how it got started.
Yeah, so I kind of, what I thought was a coincidence and random at the time now seems like, of course, everything was meant to be. But I was working in 2008 at a self-improvement startup called People Jam.
People Jam.
Yeah, which was bought by Chicken Soup for the Soul. But anyways, I was randomly doing copywriting there. It was kind of in the middle of the big recession and I needed a job, and this was like the only thing I could get. And I found myself, I knew nothing really about the online world at all. And it was really a brand new kind of place to be. Mm-hmm. Much different landscape than course, today. It is today.
Yes.
But through that and that exposure to the online world, the social world, and self-improvement, I ended up starting this little blog called Pick the Brain. It was kind of like an offshoot of People Jam that then they asked me to start developing. And when the company got sold, they pulled Pick the Brain off from People Jam. And that kind of became my full-time thing. But it was very small. I mean, I have a partner on Pick the Brain. We had like almost no traffic. But the thing is, there were probably only 5 or 6 other if you can believe this, there were probably only 5 or 6 other self-improvement blogs at the time. And what happened for us is, instead of being wildly competitive, we all kind of teamed up and shared everything we kind of knew, what was working. We started linking to each other, having each other guest post on each other's blogs. And it was amazing how that kind of collaborative spirit, just everybody rose. And so what happened for me, though, that was different for everybody else, and this goes back to a theme that I can talk about, a larger theme that I think is just so important with building an online community, is that while everybody, the 5 or 6 other blogs were really razor focused on making them personal blogs, so kind of telling their self-improvement journey, because self-improvement hadn't been in my life for a really long time, I was very curious and interested by it, but it wasn't something that I had personally, like all these tips and stuff to talk about. So, and I had such a great experience sharing the content, the original content of these others. I was like, I'm going to try and get more voices on my blog, and that's going to be my thing. So really from almost day one, I started having Pick the Brain be a community of voices led by me and under my direction, kind of steering where the themes and the topics would go. But I was able then to come up with content that I would not have been able to come up with. And And so from there, it kind of just started to grow and grow and grow. And it was kind of a very happy / lucky coincidence, because what happened was, as everybody started to post, which I never foresaw this, then they all started to promote their work
And share
and
it.
share it. And all of a
Yes.
sudden,
Really
and this was
exploded.
really early on in Facebook days and Twitter days. This was not like, social was not what was up then. It was
Right.
really search engine stuff, SEO
Right.
stuff that was like carrying you. But it had a tremendous, SEO positive, it was very positive for SEO, because all of a sudden I was building this link juice from incoming links, which again, I didn't even know it just kind of started to happen. And then as I got going and things really started to become a business, then I obviously got very invested in what was working and how I could do more of that, and blah, 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 blah.
Right. Well, congratulations, because you really carved out your own path. I mean, this was not happening a lot around you. There were no people doing courses on how to create a community and things like
Right.
that.
Yeah, I know, it was
And
brand new.
yeah, so would you call your existing platform, pickthebrain.com, would you call it both a blog and a community, or how do you talk about
Yeah.
it?
Now it's really evolved into, I mean, in a one sentence thing, I say it's a blog, but it really is a self-improvement community now,
Mhm.
with all of the different facets. Like, I have a really big Facebook page in Facebook group, and like that's where a lot of the conversations are happening, and all these things are
Okay.
kind of intertwined. And then of course the podcast was born out of that. So it's much more than a blog, and it's like there's crossover with the audience between the various places, but there's also just original audiences, that live only in those places. So
Okay.
um, it's really been interesting to watch this grow and expand. And honestly, much of what I learned was through major failures or unexpected, things that happen, like Google starting to change its algorithms, where I thought I had this
Right.
whole business locked in, and then boom, with the flip of a switch, it was like free fall. So learning how to pivot and navigate on the fly has been one of the big kind of saviors of the
Mm.
business.
And I really feel like that is a great lesson because these things happen.
Yeah.
Some of our listeners today, they'll have a great following on Facebook, and then
Mm.
boop, Facebook changes the rule. Now it's pay to play. And
Yes.
so everything changes for them. And so learning how to pivot, like you said, on the
Yeah.
fly is a big key thing. I really love what you said earlier, though, about collaboration with your competition.
Mm-hmm.
I hope if our wealthy speaker listeners are not already thinking about who are your 4 or 5 people that you could be pulling into your world, rather than really watching them with any kind of feelings of negativity. I have been doing a lot of that lately myself, Erin, and I'm just finding it so liberating not to be fearful anymore.
Yeah. And I honestly, it's just, people come to me all the time through the blog and say, hey, I want to start a blog, and what should I do? And I have really strong feelings about it, because again, the landscape is so different, and it's in at the time, I would, when I started my blog, it felt like the most difficult thing in the world,
Mm,
because it was fun and it was an adventure, and I wasn't necessarily thinking this is going to be my career, so that it wasn't as stressful as if I was like, this is what I'm doing now, I need to make this into a business. So my perspective was a little bit different. But if you look at it, it's really difficult to do that when this stuff doesn't exist, right?
right.
But now when I look at what's going on and the competition, and there's so much noise, and how do you get your voice heard?
Right.
For me, so almost my immediate reaction is like, ooh,
Yeah.
I don't know if I would want to dive in there. But having said that, nobody would have dove in 2008, and I did it, and it was worth it, So one of the things that I would say, and just as going back to what you were just talking about, is I feel like the only way to have your voice heard right now is through collaboration. It is through having a kind of tidal wave of 4 or 5 people lifting each other up, helping each other. And I'm seeing that a lot in the podcasting world, interesting enough.
Yes.
I'm getting, people are reaching out that kind of have the same kind of downloads and are like, hey, will you give me a shout out? I'll give you a shout out. And I'm like, yes, yes, yes.
Sure.
Because that's how I did it with Pick the Brain. And I do think that is really, it's just so hard if you're going to try and do it by yourself and be like heard, because there's so much noise. And so strength in numbers, I think, is really important here.
That's really a very, very, very good point. And I'm so glad that we're talking about it. And the next podcast that I'm recording is called Taming Your Gremlins. And that's all about making sure that your any kind of jealous factor or whatever thing might be that is in check. And I think when you reach out and collaborate with other people, and I have some of my Wealthy Speaker tribe now sharing leads with each other, and I love that so much because you're not going to go back, they're not going to hire you back the next year. Which of your 5 are you going to say, okay, this is who I'm hand holding into this engagement? It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and it feels good too.
It does feel good. It feels so much better than feeling anxious and jealous and worried and what if they get it and I don't? Well, if they get it this year, maybe next year will be yours. I always look at the pie as big enough for everybody.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that about Facebook, the algorithm change. Yeah, that almost totally wiped me out. Like I have almost 800,000 people, and all of a sudden, I mean, at the time I had about 650,000, and I was like, oh my God, my traffic almost stopped coming as a source overnight. Wow. And I was freaking out. And it was only through 5 or 6 peers on Facebook that were like, I was in a frenzy, and I just reached out to them and I was like, guys, I'm in free fall. I need help. Yeah. And they were like, do this, we'll join this group. We'll like, and over like 8 months, it's still not where it was, obviously, but it completely turned a corner and started heading back up. And that I could not have done alone, period, full stop. So that's an example of mine that just like reach out and create a network for yourself.
So I wanted to talk to you about flashpoints, but you're talking a lot about, this was a big setback and this was a big setback. Yes. So, but that's so, maybe our title should be Overcoming Setbacks when you're growing your business, because I think it's so important for people to say, okay, 2008 was a rough year for a lot of people. Yeah. A lot of things happened. There were some speakers who lost their whole calendar, and, there's a lot of things that went on. Talk about, though, let's turn that around and talk about flashpoints. What were some things that you did intentionally that brought you some great gains?
Well, the biggest thing that for me, and this has been a muscle that I've been kind of working on since the first Google algorithm change, which is I decided that I was never going to put all my eggs in one basket again.
Yes, good
and
one.
So I learned that very quickly because I had to. And so just being really curious about the landscape, seeing what's out there, and really adopting this idea of experimenting and saying, I'm going to do a little here, see what works, pivot. And if it doesn't work, I'm bouncing, and like, so really kind of creating this muscle memory for myself about a process of how to kind of expand, and not just expand like across the board, but expand really strategically. Because what I see a lot of right now when I consult with brands is I do a lot of consulting work on social growth for brands and stuff like that. And what they want to do is have their hands in everything. Like they've got to have a Twitter feed. They got to have an Instagram. They got to have a newsletter. They got to be doing stories. Some of these brands even are interested in being on Snapchat. And I'm like, no. You don't have to be everywhere, but you have to be is the right place. You got to really have a clear identity about where your audience is living, and then be razor focused about speaking to them in that network. And people are so scared that they're going to miss out. So anyways, but back to my point is that it's really constantly experimenting, testing things, but not having this need to be everywhere and all things to all people. I feel like the things that really work is having a specific niche voice and really finding those super fans that are engaged in what you have to say and can start a conversation with you. That's another flashpoint. As soon as I started really relying on my audience to tell me where to go, or to at least guide me where to go, this is where things really got interesting and started to snowball. So, and where I started to get that, again, this was kind of out of something negative, is when that Google algorithm, when I was relying only on SEO and Google algorithm, I had very little communication with my audience other than like some comments. When I was able to then forced to switch gears and kind of decided I was going to start on Facebook, and I got this real-time feedback.
Yeah.
I started listening to that, engaging with that. It really started to tighten my editorial calendar, and deepen my relationship with them. And then ultimately, when I was selling things, we had a much better relationship, but they were much more open to buying things. And so really paying attention, not being patronizing or like, you know what you're doing, being in it with your audience has really changed the game for me too.
That's amazing. Well, I'm so excited for your growth and seeing how you've done it so fearlessly. There are many moments along the way where you might have wanted to just lay down and take a nap.
Yeah,
Say that's it.
Yeah.
You have small children in and amongst all of this. Talk about your kids for a little bit and your family. What's going on right now? I know you have.
Yeah. So just when you think you have everything figured out, I had a baby, and that's like starting from scratch all over again. His name's George. He's 21 months. And as we were kind of joking at the top of this, he was up for half the night last night. So, that's been real. I mean, it's just the most exciting and best adventure ever. But it's also just, I've had to recalibrate everything, to make things work. I'm lucky enough that I have a flexible schedule because everything I kind of do is online, or I'm writing or whatever. But, and that's good on the one hand, but on the flip side is that it's so easy to push all of your other obligations away because I don't have to show up somewhere every morning at 9:00. So you can't push those types of, you can't, when you're not the boss or you're not working for yourself, you have to show up. So for the first year, it was really me trying to navigate, like, how do I create boundaries to get my work done and, not alienate my audience, because as you probably know, you are only as good as your last blog post or your last podcast or your whatever. This is a very fickle, world that we live in, this online world.
There's so many other choices, right?
So many other choices. And it's like, if I'm not around for a couple days, I just see an immediate dip in my traffic. It's unbelievable. It's like, it's really like, it's kind of overwhelming because especially when you have a new baby and it's like, well, for 3 months, I'm kind of going to be like, not as consistently
I've
there.
seen that with other social media stars where they say, okay, I have to take a step back right now. And they must be very fearful that if they do take a step back, that people are not going to wait, 3 months for them. I was just telling you before we started that we had our 3 and 4-year-old grandchildren, and about halfway through, we just had them just for the weekend. My goodness. And I thought to myself afterwards, how do moms and dads even take a shower? Like, I couldn't even figure out how people function with the most basics, let alone run a business, let alone do all of these things. I mean, it must just take such a balancing act. Well, let's talk about your book a little bit, because that's kind of I don't think that's where it was spawned, but I wonder if you would write your book a little bit differently. Talk about your book and what that has done for your business too. Yeah, so
this book has been such a major turning point. It's amazing what a book will do. I mean, I didn't really realize, everybody's like, publishing's dead. The model has certainly changed, but It is unbelievable how impressed people really still are by somebody's ability to write a book.
Yeah.
And I get it, because I wrote that book and I was like, how the heck, wow, that was a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. Talk about Simon and Schuster. Tell everybody the title and subtitle, please.
Yeah. So the book is called How to Get Shit Done: Why Women Need to Stop Doing Everything So They Can Achieve Anything. And it's out through Simon and Schuster.
Well done.
Yes, thank you. And it's funny. When I first moved to LA, I talked about this on the other podcast, so I won't get into it, but I moved here to be a writer. And long story short, when the recession hit, I had not been paid to write anything. I'd been here for years, hadn't been paid to write anything. And that's why I was kind of forced to get this copywriting job. Anyways, through the creating Pick the Brain and building that up into a pretty big business. And then I co-founded another company called Leaf TV and sold that to a publicly traded company called Demand Media, which is now called the Leaf Group. Through all of that, a lit agent out of New York reached out to me through my blog and said, would you be interested in writing a book? And I was like, I can't believe it. This is another like overnight success that took, 17 years.
Right.
And so I wrote this. I wrote the book. It's a book about, as the title kind of suggests, it's about productivity and really taking a critical look at what productivity means and what it should mean for you.
Kind of like a less is more approach, right?
Yeah, and yes, exactly. And really being razor focused on what you want, which means you have to really get to know who you are, because a lot of us, especially women, have just gone through the motions and done what we thought we should be doing as opposed to what really speaks to us on a personal level. And when we get into the workplace, we're just like fighting to make our mark and keep our jobs and not be inched out and have our voices heard. And in all of that, we've kind of lost what's really important to us. And so we end up taking on all this stuff just because we're scared to say no, and to really say, no, actually, this is who I am and this is what I want and this is what I'm going to work on. And so, the whole idea is just understanding who you are and then paring back everything that you're doing in your life, both career-wise and personally, to really move the needle for you and stop doing everything, because when you're doing all these other things, you're moving the needle for other people, not yourself.
Right. That's so interesting. So we talked about how less is more in terms of social media. And we're talking about how less is more in terms of productivity. And I talk a lot about picking a lane and not being all things to all people.
Totally.
In terms of your topic. So it seems to be a trend, and I'll bet you have just seen that over and over again in business.
Totally. And I'll even add one more thing to that. I also am like Krypton. What is that? No, what is Superman? Kryptonite. Kryptonite to me is the world multitasking. I can't, we're just getting so sped up, and it's like, I'm not doing this now, but I could be on the phone with you, scrolling my Instagram. Oh, I get a text. I can respond to a thing. Look at how much I'm doing. And the truth is you're doing a lot of nothing except your mind is frazzled, your energy is frazzled, and your productivity is actually way lower if you look at it cumulatively. Right. So yes, even in that, it's like, do one thing at a time and do it well, and you will start saving so much time and energy. You'll be a far more effective person. And that's
really good. Really good. Okay. So wealthy speakers, I'm really so excited to unpack all of this great stuff, because when we look at your business umbrella, some of you have keynotes, workshops that you're doing, maybe consulting, coaching, maybe you're thinking about writing a book, and maybe there's going to be a blog and a podcast that can be monetized later. I look at every one of those, Erin, tell me if you agree, as a small business. And when you go and you try to start a blog and a speaking business and a coaching practice all simultaneously, it is going to end up being a little bit problematic, because it's very difficult to do everything well all at the same time. We just have to pace ourselves.
Yeah, I think that one of the big problems is that people see kind of like like the kind of rock star superstars. Like if you look at Oprah, and she's producing movies, and she had her TV show, and she's got Super Soul Sundays, and she's got.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is that she didn't start like that.
No.
She was razor focused on being a reporter and then she had a talk show host, and she was literally just a talk show host for like 15 years.
Yes.
And then she started expanding off. And so when people don't see like the whole career thing, they just look at like where they are now and they think, I got to be everywhere. I got to be like Oprah. I got to be. No, it's the opposite. You got to start with one, maybe two things. I would say one when you're talking about career, but one, maybe you have an offshoot of something that really tightly relates. And as you said, stay and pick a lane and just really dial into that, because that's where you're going to find the most, it's just when you keep things tighter, it's so much easier to get momentum around it. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's how you start honing this authentic voice. When you're all over the place, it's like, well, what are you? Are you an author? Are you a this? Are you that? And ultimately, if you find success in one and then two, you can kind of spread your wings and branch out without feeling like this person's all over the place.
Right.
But trust me, it's far better to be the amazing speaker, that just kills it time and time. And that person, get her. Yeah. She just kills it. And then you start to expand up, but be the best you can in one of these things.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. Okay, let's talk, kind of circling back to productivity a little bit again. You are a content machine, I'm thinking, of sorts. Now, I love the idea of other people kind of coming in, and certainly team is a big part of my world. Mm-hmm. I hand it off at 80%, and then the team makes it look pretty and do all kinds of things with it. Yeah. Talk about your content schedule and how do you plan your time in order to keep the machine running and filled with great, juicy ideas.
Yeah. So one of the reasons that this idea of having other people contribute content to my blog has been such a great vehicle is that that takes a lot of the heavy lifting off of me. Right. And so, because 2008, this has been started, so this is like 11 years. I can't possibly imagine if it were me still just on the daily, like how that, I mean, I know people that do it. I don't know how they do it. And so where I spend a lot of, have like freelance and have people doing the heavy lifting is in that content. And then I have somebody working for me for my social, for Facebook. Right. Who's very dedicated just to that, because that really is a big driver once again for me.
And how many people do you have following out on that Facebook page again?
I have just under 800,000.
So that's a lot of people to be. And so talk a little bit about, just for those people who might be trying to think about how they hire for social, what exactly is this person doing for you?
This person they program my content.
Okay.
They are in charge of, ever since Facebook changed the algorithm, and I told you I reached out to those 4 or 5 people, I'm still doing content shares with about 3 of them. So that person picks the content to pull from the other people and post, does all the scheduling around that.
Scanning the horizon constantly for great things to share. That's a great tip right there. I really like that idea.
Yeah. And especially if you've built up a little, the audience, you don't have to have 800,000. You can have 1,000 people. You can have 5,000 people. But if that audience is engaged and you can share somebody's content and get a little bit of traction, because right now there are pages that are really big that are like crickets. And then there are pages that have 10,000 followers, but it's a really robust experience. Right. And so don't let the number of followers you have, feel like, I can, I'll never make it. It just work really closely with what you've got. Really, really foster those relationships, because they'll go a long way. So I have that person I have my person doing that. And then I'm in the self-improvement space. And so as probably everybody knows, the motivational and inspirational quotes and gifts that play very well on Facebook. So he creates all of those.
And how much are you sharing in a day?
Yeah. So on my blog, I post one new piece of content a day, and I've played with that. I've gone up to 4 new pieces of content a day, and I just saw real diminishing returns. And then I went all the way down to posting every couple days, which was not good. I found my sweet spot is between 1 and 2 posts a day. But for me, doubling the posts is double the work. And so I've decided that 1 is where it feels good for me, as well as so
and you're not writing, let's be clear, you're not writing every one a post, but you are posting blog every day.
And it's original, so whoever's submitting content,
you're not getting them to reshare things that they've already posted.
It only exists on Pick the Brain.
Very good,
which is very important for a variety of reasons.
Sure.
And then on Facebook, we have been experimenting. It is a constant work Facebook is doing so many changes constantly. It's just, it's really, I don't know I'm starting to not know what their business model is, honestly, because it just feels like, but anyways, so we are constantly pivoting, but I would say on average right now, there are probably about 6 posts a day.
6 posts a day. And are you guys, you doing any pay to play on that?
No.
All organic.
Yeah, I don't do any paid on my Facebook. I have a little bit about 3 years ago, but I found that as soon as I started paying, then when I didn't pay, they held the thing. And for me, in the self-improvement, because I'm not selling something usually, right? It's a very heavy content play.
Right.
Not like
they like you more because of that, perhaps.
Right. And so it doesn't, well, yeah, if I were selling something, I would definitely be looking at just a cost benefit, looking at a kind of an arbitrage. If I pay for this, how much do I sell? And so that would be a very different model on Facebook. But because I'm not product oriented, I'm content oriented, I really try to keep it as organic as possible. When I work with brands, I will allow them the option of putting a budget behind the posts that I've written for them to promote on Facebook. But I don't personally. Pick the Brain never pays for.
And so you've got 800K people on this place. And what would your reach be on an average post?
So my average reach is, my weekly reach is about, let's work into this backwards. My weekly reach is about, I want to say 2.5 million. So the reach per post is not huge, right? Because if I'm doing 3 original posts per day, that's 21 originals per week, 2.5 million. So what is that? 100,000? Is that it?
I'm not a math major.
Yeah, I think it's something like that.
Okay. All right. Wow. This is just fascinating to me. And, the minute you start working numbers, I would glaze over.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, let's talk about monetization of, so I'm sure it started with one thing and then people started paying for other things. So let's talk about your journey in terms of monetizing this.
So right off the bat, when I kind of found a footing and that's really started to take off, it was 100% ad revenue, like Google ads. Now the business is only about 50%.
Okay.
Actually, I'd say about 40% ads. And where I get the majority of the money is through working with brands and sponsorships. So creating custom programs, which basically for me is like a combination of blog posts, potentially adding in podcast, that content into the podcast, newsletter, social promotion. So it's like creating
somebody could get a content package from you and say, okay, you're going to write about them, you're going to talk about them on your podcast, and then there'll be this thing. That's very interesting. I love that business model, and that you've figured out a way to make all of this hard work for you. Yeah.
And it's not often easy, because with these things, it's a big switch to go from like a completely like, just an ad play where I don't even really do anything. It's an it's just like I run my content, I've got my ads running, and sometimes I plug in, custom ads and whatever, but that was very easy lifting.
Right.
And then you switch gears to like, now I got to go out and get clients. And luckily I have a lot of people coming to me, but still like making those work and really getting a return for clients. And like, I hope this content resonates with my audience. It's almost a different business in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I can't imagine the pressure to be constantly pumping out good, solid content for your people. So for those of us who blog once a week, for those of us who podcast once a week, let's just take a deep breath here, because we aren't under these same types of the same type of pressure I think that maybe you are under. Well,
one thing I just want to say is like the number of posts and stuff is less important than consistency.
Right.
So
just
even
choose a number.
Choose a number. If it's once a week and you're going to show up at this place and this time, that's cool. But you got to make sure. Yeah. That's when people say to me, I want to start a podcast. And I'm like, you can't, if that's great, but you got to have everything in place to be able to discipline, because it takes a long time to build an audience. And you're going to be like, why am I doing this for a long time? But if you don't have these parameters in place, it is out of the question you're going to succeed.
Yeah. And people said to me, what? It took you 7 years to get your podcast right? It's because it was a slow build, and I don't think I committed to doing it on a regular basis until about the 5th year.
Yeah.
When I finally said, so we've been going about 2 years now, every single Thursday, a podcast comes out. Yeah. And that has been a huge game changer. Yeah. So the commitment itself is a flashpoint, I think.
Right. Totally. Absolutely.
Whatever you decide to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Erin, you and I could just, I mean, we're going to have to do a part 3, I'm thinking, because
I love it.
And when I was prepping for today's call, I'm like, geez, what are we going to talk about? I don't really know. I was a little bit unsure. Well, I'm so glad we did it, because this has been so fun and so enlightening. I really think our listeners can pull out a lot of great tips here.
Yeah, well, good. I love talking to you, and I'd love to come back anytime.
Okay. Let's talk about where people can find you.
Okay, sure. So on social, I am all things at Erin Falconer or at Pick the Brain. Most of my at Erin Falconer, you'll see cute pictures of my son. And at Pick the Brain is all the other stuff. And then my blog is pickthebrain.com, as you mentioned, and my book is available anywhere: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Chapters if you're in Canada.
Beautiful. And we will look at you with the Canadian reference. Well done. We will link to all of those things in the show notes. If you want to go over to speakerlauncher.com and click on the podcast, you will see the show notes there with all of these fantastic details. Erin, thank you so much for your time again today. It's very early morning out there.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. As I said, I always love chatting with you.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, Wealthy Speaker listeners, if you've enjoyed our podcast, I hope you'll let us know. And I want to make sure that you do not miss any of our future content. Make sure you go out on iTunes or wherever you listen and hit that subscribe button. Well, that's it for us today. Thank you so much for listening. And with that, we will say, see you soon, Wealthy Speakers. Bye for now, everyone. Hey, thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed our show, you'll want to come and visit us at the Wealthy Speaker School, where we provide a proven roadmap for building your dream business. Go to wealthyspeakerschool.com. And for show notes for today's podcast, head on over to speakerlauncher.com and click on podcast. I'll see you soon, Wealthy Speakers.